Well, good afternoon. It is great to see you all. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Bob, and I hope that you enjoy this as much as I'm enjoying presenting this material. I'm a member of the Hill Cumorah expedition team. For the last 20 years, we've been going down to Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and El Salvador. And we are following up on theories that match Book of Mormon events with actual historical places. These are theories that were put forth by Neil Steedy and that he has developed through the 40-plus years of archaeology work that he's done, and we're trying to pick up the football and move forward with his work. So we'll get started here. While on a research trip in 2015, I discovered what I believe is the gospel message embedded in the architecture of Uxmal, which is located in the Yucatan of Mexico. Now, this is primarily the areas that we have visited. Every one of these pinpoints on this Google Earth map is a place we have visited. It's been upwards of 60 places now that we've been to gather information, to fill in and create these parallels between the Mayan and the Olmec cultures and then what we find in the Book of Mormon. Everything that takes place in the Book of Mormon basically is in these places that are highlighted. The Jaredites are basically over to the west and north of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and then the Nephite-Mulekite group is the Ucmal River Valley system. It's a huge river system. The Lamanites are the Highland Mayas in the south, down in Guatemala and Honduras. They also have a strip of land that runs up along the Pacific coast. And this is actually part of the trade route that went on between the Olmec and the Maya, the Highland Maya down here. Jershon is basically the country of Belize. It's against the Caribbean Ocean. And Antionum is up in this northward place. If any one of these is fluid, it's Antionum. It's hard at this point for us to definitively locate exactly what the borders were. But several of these locations up here, Corazal, Becan, and places like that, are Antionum areas. Now, the final battle, I should say the Mormon Wars, where the Lamanites are coming up and they're pushing through the Ucmal River Valley, which is the Zarahemla area, and to Bountiful, and then over to Land of Desolation. When this was going on, people were pushed out of the way. You know, you and I, if we're not involved in the military, we have families to take care of. And when the militaries are in their battles, we take our families and we say, we don't have a dog in this fight. We're going to provide safety. And so hundreds of thousands move to areas away from where this battle is taking place with these political powers. Some of them are moving up into the Yucatan. What we're going to cover today is way up here in the very top of the Yucatan. And what we have found is everything that I have highlighted are areas that are talked about in the Book of Mormon, but not these up here. Why is that? It's because these are late Golden Age constructions. And how many pages in the Book of Mormon do you find on the Golden Age? Like next to nothing. It covers 250 years in about a page and a half, right? So, but what we find up here are clearly Book of Mormon gospel-related messages, in the sense that most all of those sites that are up there in the very top are talking about a diving God, which is a symbol for Christ in his resurrected form descending to the people here in this world. And there's also a lot of references to the three Nephites. They even have statues of them up there. So, the site of Uxmal is a late classic site that was built in the Toltec style, much like Chichen Itza, Copan, and a host of other classic sites. Again, we're going to be looking, this is the northern part of the Yucatan Peninsula. Uxmal is located over here. A lot of you have probably been to Chichen Itza, or maybe Coba, or Tulum. But we're over on the western part of the Yucatan. Now, at the core of understanding the lessons found in the designs at Uxmal is the concept of the cube of space. I gave a little presentation about 6 months ago. Part of this, you'll see, is what I gave earlier. This is the cube of space, and it is the fundamental building block for expressing morals in art and in architecture. We're going to go through, I'm going to give you the basics of what this represents. It's founded on the Hebrew alphabet, and it's comprised of the following. There are 3 mother letters in the Hebrew alphabet. There are 7 letters with 2 sounds, and 12 letters with 1 sound, for a total of 22 letters. The 3 mother letters are assigned to the 3 axes of length, width, and height. That's the way that they do this in the cube of space. There are also elements that are assigned to each of these 3 axes. The east-west axis is the Hebrew letter mem, which is assigned the element of water. The north-south axis is the Hebrew letter shin, which is assigned the element of fire. And the earth to heaven axis is assigned the Hebrew letter aleph, which is the element of wind. Together, they represent the moment of creation. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God, wind, moved upon the face of the waters, the east-west axis, and God said, "Let there be light," which is fire. And there was light. So the 3 elements of air, water, and fire are represented here in allusion to the moment of creation, and each is an axis in the cube of space. Now the 7 letters with 2 sounds are the 7 points created by the endpoints of the axes and the point of their intersection. Now, since we're talking about a cube, these axes are not infinite. They are limited by the box that's created, therefore they're line segments, which means there's points at the end of each line segment. And then there's a point where all the axes meet. The Native Americans actually practice this expression. When they talk about the honor of the directions, I honor the east, I honor the south, I honor the west, I honor the north, I honor grandmother earth, I honor grandfather sky, and the place in my breast where those axes all meet. That's the 7th point. It's the heart. Now the 12 letters with 1 sound represent the 12 lines that form the cube, or form the boundaries of the cube. So the Hebrew alphabet provides the matrix for the cube of space. Now I'm giving you all of this because we're going to find components of this in the architecture. The architects, whoever designed, took these elements and they expressed them in the architecture. Thanks to Einstein, we understand that the cube of space is a representation of the 4th dimension of time and space. If these axes were infinite, it would be eternity. But because they are not, they are defined, therefore we have something that is measurable, both with time and with distance. Now, in the Mayan sacred expressions, the king kunks is found in many places, and it's represented as 5 dots placed with 4 corners and a center, or at other times in the form of a cross. And we find them hidden in artwork all the time in this kind of expression. Very often there's what they call a kin glyph, which is often a quetzal flower. We find them here and here. There's windows that are like that in several of the places down in Mexico and Guatemala. The 5 points of the king kunks are actually an expression of the intersection of 2 axes, length and width, which forms a plane. It is the expression of the 4 directions and their intersection. So if we talk about 5 points, it's talking about the plane that we walk through every day, the 4 directions. From concepts found at Teotihuacan, the plane is referred to as the law of center. It states that this physical plane was created for the perfection of man. We are born into this world, and we will eternally remain in this 2-dimensional world unless we choose to be raised from it by means of the 3rd axis. We must expand from the realm of 5 points to one that contains 7 points. Man is only truly complete when he has established the axis of earth to heaven. We have to have that axis is our relationship with God. We have to have that in place. This concept is expressed in multiple places throughout the Maya region, such as in Pakal's tomb at Palenque. Here is the sarcophagus lid of Pakal's tomb. A lot of you guys have probably seen this on Ancient Aliens. They try to convince you that this guy's a interstellar traveler and his foot is on an accelerator. Okay, yeah. If you look here, the central component of this is what they call the world tree, or a tree of life. This is the earth monster at the base. At the top, you'll notice over there is the celestial bird. So this is earth and heaven, and this cross is the axis of earth to heaven. Pakal, again, this is his sarcophagus lid. So his body is underneath this. And in essence, what it's saying is, he is placing his body in the earth. The foliage is coming up to engulf him, but his spirit, which is this breath out of his nostril, and his eye is fixed on the celestial bird up above. That is his hope for life eternal. This concept is also in Palenque at the Temple of the Cross and the Temple of the Foliated Cross. Here's Temple of the Cross. And you see again the central theme. The earth monster, the celestial bird, and this axis of earth to heaven, which actually is illustrated as a cross. This particular panel is expressing Christ's condescension into the physical form. This is the birth of Christ. His celestial bird is Jesus coming into physical form and into the earth. The imagery of the cross is illustrated, or illustrates that it is grounded in the earth and reaches to the heavens. The top is the nest or house for the celestial bird, or the quetzal bird, or Christ. And it implies that this is the axis that connects the physical world with the spiritual world. So here we are at the Temple of the Foliated Cross on this panel. It's the same theme, except now the celestial bird has risen. And what we have here is actually an illustration in Palenque of the 2 trees that were found in the original garden. Christ came into the world that was dominated by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And with his death and resurrection, he transformed that tree to the tree of life. So, the cubist-space concept of us being born into the world of 5 points is expressed at Uxmal. Let's take a look at the site and the messages being portrayed in the architecture. This is a Google Earth map of Uxmal. We're going to start up here at the very top. It's actually the northeast corner of the site. And what we're going to find here is the moment of creation, the Garden of Eden, and then the gospel as set forth because of the fall of man. This is the first thing you see as you walk into the site. What was the language that the Book of Mormon was written in?
Reformed Egyptian.
Reformed Egyptian. They knew the Egyptian language. Do you think they carried some Egyptian concepts with them? Yeah. The Egyptian concept of creation is that it was a watery world, and the water receded, and this mound rose up out of the water, and they called first man on that mound Atum. A-T-U-M, Atum. Very cognitive sounding to Adam, isn't it? So this is representing, by the way, that doorway was not part of the original construction. Archaeologists busted through and found a room in there. They never covered it back over. It would have looked like this coming from the east. They did this chronology as you're moving from the east to the west. That is the chronological line of how things happened. Everything begins in the east, just like the sun rises in the east at the beginning of the day, and it goes to set in the west. Then the beginning of all things will be shown in the east. So that's what you're doing. You're coming into the site from the east side, and you're seeing this mound that's coming up out of the earth. There's a little window in the top, and I believe that's where the word was spoken. Because when you come around to the back side, on the west side, there's this huge doorway, and it is in the shape of a mouth. And coming out of the mouth would be the wind of God, who's pronouncing creation, let there be light. And coming down this stairway then is multiple different expressions of the matrix of time. These first 7 steps would indicate 7 days of the week. You have 12 faces on the right side, 12 faces on the left side. I believe that this is illustrating the pathway of the sun through the heavens and the pathway of the moon through the heavens. It is also perhaps 24 hours of the day. But it's all about time. So there's been a creation that's gone on, and the lights have been set in the heavens, and there's a way to map time. This is illustrating creation and the fact that there are birds in the heavens. Same thing here. The interesting part about this particular plaza that huge temple empties down into is it's all on one level, indicating that there's unity, equality. Everyone has equal access to all things. You'll notice on the left, as we move west across the plaza, there's a corbelled arch. Corbelled arch, in this instance, can be interpreted as a birthing canal. When did children and birthing take place for the first time?
Adam and Eve after the exit from the garden.
When they were kicked out of the garden, right? Then birthing became a process. So here you are coming out of the garden and being born into a world that's no longer equal. Now it's stratified. Now there's inequality. There is now high and there's low. It's a world of difficulty. It's not equal access to all things. So then we move to what's now called Well, they call it the nunnery quadrangle. But here is the expression of the gospel that God put in motion after the fall of man. This structure in the east, which is the beginning of the day, when we are born into this realm, we are only born with a potential for fulfillment. Why do I say that? Here we have a facade that implies 7 doorways, but in reality, we only have 5 doors for access into this realm. You see what I'm talking about? We've got 5 doorways, but if you look up above, the implication is there should be 7. This tells us that we are born into a realm of only 2 axes, length and width. The axis of earth to heaven has been severed due to the fall of man. By contrast, the structure on the west end has 7 doorways, which implies that a decision has been made to erect the axis from earth to heaven. This begs the question, what decision was made that opened the 2 doorways that were only potential doors at birth? The clues to that answer are provided in the structures on the north and on the south. This structure on the south has a total of 8 doorways with a corbelled arch in the center. 7 denotes the completion of the cycle, but the number 8 is the beginning of a new cycle. Therefore, this must be a new beginning or rebirth. And I say this because 7 in the Hebrew Kabbalah system does represent completion. You have 7 days of the week, you have 7 years of plenty, 7 years of lean, you have the 7 sabbatical years. These are all cycles. We even have on the final feast of the year, the Feast of Tabernacles, is 7 days. And then the Hebrews celebrate a day that's called the 8th day. And it's the beginning of the new cycle, and the new feast cycle. So the number 8 represents rebirth or a renewal. And the center archway is in the shape of a birthing canal to indicate rebirth. We've already been born once, coming out of the garden into this area. Now there's an implication of another rebirth. Now the structure on the north has 11 doorways, but it is elevated above the courtyard by a very large staircase. There are a total of 22 steps. What do we learn about the Hebrew alphabet?
22 letters.
22 letters. And the first 3 steps of the staircase are very wide, as if they are purposefully exaggerated. Why? I believe this stairway is representing the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and their moral teachings. The 3 principal steps being the mother letters of the axes. Do you follow there what I'm indicating? And you will note that the staircase is bracketed by 2 buildings. There's one on either side of that stairway. Here are further clues about erecting an axis of earth to heaven. Because Maya read from left to right, we're going to start with the building on the left. The building on the left has 5 doorways. This alludes to the plane of 5 points into which we are born. And you see the rectangles above the lintel in each one of those? It's a rectangle. It's indicating it's a plane that we're walking through. Now the building on the right has 3 doorways. This makes for a total of 8 doorways on the north. That's at least on the plaza level, which implies new beginnings again or rebirth. But if we lay out the 5 doorways as a plane and then make the 3 doorways as an axis, we can create a cube. And the reason I'm doing that is this reason. The center doorway is wider than the other 4. The center doorway is wider than the other 2. The implication is that this should be part of this intersection of axes. Okay? So you have represented the plane that we walk through and then the axis of earth to heaven. So that if we create then the cube, the axis of earth to heaven, This really goes back to Jacob's ladder. That's the concept. Especially here, the 11 doorways. I've done a lot of research on this. In the Hebrew Kabbalah mystical system, the Sephirot is the tree of life. And in part of that teaching system, the number 11 literally alludes to Jacob's ladder, the way to access the enlightenment that's required to ascend into the tree of life. So Jacob's ladder is the axis of earth to heaven, or the stairway, which elevates us from this earthly plane to the heavens above. Spiritual enlightenment is the key to becoming whole. Choosing Christ, and then using the teachings of the Hebrew alphabet. How many of you realize that the alphabet of the Hebrew is not just letters? Each of the letters has a gematria, it has a numerical value, and each of the letters has a midrash, which is a moral teaching that goes with it. All of that factors into what I'm finding here at Uxmal. Therefore, I believe that the lesson of the nunnery quadrangle should be read in this manner. When we are born into this world as fallen creatures of the original creation, we are doomed to remain in this realm. Our only hope is to discover a pathway that will unlock the other two doors, which brings us from the earthly plane to the heavens above. As we pass through the courtyard between birth in the east and death in the west, we must encounter a moment of decision. When we choose to enter into the structure of the one who compels us to be born again, we establish a pathway leading from the south to the north. In Maya philosophy, the axis of south to north pivots 90 degrees and becomes the axis of earth to heaven. That's clearly stated in a paper I came across in 2000. It was written in 2000. This gentleman studied the direction glyphs of the Maya, and he found clear indications that the images used for the south actually connected it to the earth, and the images used for the north in the glyph connected it with the sky place. Kana is the name of that. And so it becomes, the north-south axis becomes the earth to heaven axis. The enlightenment of the sun in the south becomes the foundation of earthly knowledge and action. It's one thing to accept Jesus as Savior. What's that require? Salvation comes with accepting Christ as Savior. But then what does that require? It requires a change. We've got to do something. By choosing to be born again, we then look to the north. It is in the north that we are taught how to follow that pathway of enlightenment to the heavens by way of the ladder that Jacob saw extending from earth to heaven. Jacob's ladder is symbolic of spiritual enlightenment. Faith, hope, and charity are the keys to successfully ascending that ladder. So that when life is ended, we will have successfully erected the axis of earth to heaven, and all doors are open for entry into the afterlife. This building is on the west end of the nunnery quadrangle. The facade of this structure has Maya afterlife concepts embedded in the artwork. So, the Maya often depicted travel into the afterlife taking place in a vessel called the celestial canoe. Take a look at the passengers on the canoe. 3 of them are anthropomorphic, they're human. 4 of them are zoomorphic. They are creatures, animal creatures of the earth. So, the indication here is that these are the ones who are in the plane of the 2 directions of length and width. These are the ones that are creating the axis of earth to heaven. Notice it is the number 7, completion. Okay? In the facade up there, there is a serpent that goes across and creates that image. The feathered serpent depicted in the facade is fashioned in the shape of what the Maya call the celestial canoe. Being a waterborne vessel on a building representing the end of life, this alludes to the journey from this watery world to anchor in a peaceful afterlife. This is what's in the bow of the ship, or bow of the illustration here. This concept is illustrated in the artwork at the bow of the canoe, where Quetzalcoatl has consumed a human and now carries him to the north. That is the face of a man inside the mouth of Quetzalcoatl. So if we allow ourselves to be consumed by Quetzalcoatl, or by Christ, he will waft us safely over the tempestuous seas to anchor in the harbor of the afterlife. He's carrying us to the north. That's the direction that is moving. And the north was the building that had the stairway into the heavens. So here's another item to infer that the Maya of the Yucatan had knowledge of biblical stories and the concept of Judeo-Christian theology. Remember the birthing canal on the south, that archway in the south? There are red handprints on the ceiling. Does this allude to the scarlet thread heritage of Judah and confirm that this is symbolizing birth? You remember the story of the twin sons of Judah, the one presented with a hand first, and the handmaid tied a scarlet thread around the wrist, and then he withdrew, and the other one was born first. Well, the other one that was born first was Perez. And all of the king lines of Judea hail back to their connection to Perez. In the first chapter of Matthew, where they're quoting Christ's lineage, he goes back to Perez. But it's Zerah that is the scarlet thread. Do we have any names here in the Book of Mormon that might allude to, like Zarahemla? Right? Or do the red hands infer that the works of the believer are now sanctified because it has been covered in the blood of the Lamb? This may hint that our rebirth will complete our adoption into the house of Israel. How can I make this statement? Because the next plaza implies it. So we're going to go here where we've seen creation, the Garden of Eden, and the introduction of the gospel. We're going to move into this plaza. It's lower in elevation. We've come through that birthing canal to be reborn, and we come into this plaza. The structure on the east end of the lower plaza defines the context of the meaning for the buildings that are found on the plaza. Note that we have 12 doorways and 11 pillars. Could the doorways allude to the 12 tribes through whom the law was established? That would be a Judeo concept there. With the earth to heaven fulfillment, which is the pillars completed by the 11 apostles who established the church after the resurrection of Christ. Indicating that it might be alluding to an architectural design to represent that the Maya revered the Judeo-Christian belief system. I understand that there's not much there that I'm working on as far as that ties that strongly, but in lieu of everything else that we're finding, and especially what's here at the next location, it seems to fit. The primary structure on the South Plaza is a large ball court that symbolizes a spiritual battleground. In other words, once you are reborn in the covenant of the children of Israel, you have enlisted in the army of God, where spiritual battles will be your life experience. How many of you can attest to that? Following Christ is not an easy pathway. If you're looking for an easy pathway, there are other ways to go. The concept of these spiritual battles is about the process of preparation for the afterlife. All right, so we're going to digress for a minute. Here's a modern depiction of Pakal and what his entombed body held in his hands. So there's a Best Western in Palenque with this huge, what is that, 25-foot tall structure that they put up there. You notice he has something in his hands. It's because in his right hand they found a jade cube, and in his left hand they found a jade sphere. These hold moral teachings, and the moral teachings go like this. What we do with our right hand is what we're consciously faithful to. It's our works. Everything, all of our works, everything that we do is with our hands. So the right hand is what we're faithful to. The left hand then becomes the consequence of what we're concentrating on. The consequences can be intended. The consequences can be unintended. But nevertheless, they are a consequence. So what he's saying here, what do we know about the structure of a cube versus the structure of a sphere? The cube, if you go from the center point of where all the axes meet to any point on the outside of the shape, you're going to have a hard time finding any of them that are the same length. The world that we walk through is filled with inequality. There is no equality in the cube, other than the axes and a few, how do I say that? A few places where, by chance, you might find something of the same length, but very rarely will you be working with true equality. But the sphere, if you go from the center point of the axes of the sphere to any place on the outside of that shape, it's equal. That is the gospel. In Christ, there is no rich or poor, male or female, bond or free. We are equally children of God. And so, what he's saying here is he's erected the axis of earth to heaven while he walks faithfully through the cube of space. And the byproduct of that is the creation of a perfected equality in the afterlife. That's what's being implied. So, the spiritual battle is primarily with the self. To refine the spirit to a mode of equality that it can pass the judgment of going through the hoop and being accepted into the heavenly realms. The way that they play this is you have opposing teams on either side of this hoop, and they take a ball that's made of rubber. They say some of them are up to 9 pounds, depending on how large the ball is, but it's solid rubber. And without the use of hands, they try and kick or push that ball so that it bounces and goes through the hoop. And in essence, it's a form of judgment. The hoop judges that it is circular, that it is a sphere. Notice that the judgment takes place up high. This right here is the serpent Quetzalcoatl. He is the mediator between the physical and the spiritual world. Everything below that serpent there is the physical world. Everything above that is the heavens. And so the ball court is, in essence, displaying the battle, the spiritual battle that we go through in the physical realm to try and reach the perfection in Christ through Quetzalcoatl. Now, just beyond the ball court is a raised plaza with structures representing the rewards of heaven. So we're going to go from the plaza down to this elevated plaza. It's a large structure that's elevated. They built it up and built structures on it. On the west side of the base of the raised platform, there are a few small rooms. There is nothing that identifies these as afterlife glories. However, their placement beneath the terrestrial plane implies these are representing mansions in the telestial realm. They're on the same level as the ball court, by the way. This structure is located on the raised platform, and that's probably about 15, 18 feet above the ball court where we were. The band at the top has turtles all around the building. Because the turtles symbolize the earth, it identifies this level as the terrestrial level of the glories. And I say, how many of you are aware that in the Native American culture, we walk on the back of Turtle Island. The turtle represents the earth that we walk on. And so that's what this is referencing. The turtles all the way around that top artistic piece at the top is identifying this as the terrestrial level. Additionally, this platform is at the same elevation as the north building of the quadrangle, which symbolizes the heavens. In other words, you remember where we talked about the big stairway and the building with 11 doorways that symbolize the heavens? This platform is at the same elevation as that. That wasn't an accident. That's a design feature to indicate that they're connected, they're related to one another. Now this is the Governor's Palace, which is located on the same platform as the Turtle Building, and it correlates with the terrestrial level of heaven. The stairway leading up to the Governor's Palace also begins with 3 exaggerated steps, which I believe alludes to Jacob's ladder and the virtues of faith, hope, and charity. It can also be alluding to the 3 axes that are the mother letters. However, there are 26 steps here, not 22. So that's a little variation of some form, and I'm sure there's a message in it. I haven't found it yet. Maybe one of you knows what 26 is, why it's important. There are a total of 11 doors facing forward on this structure, just like the heaven structure in the nunnery quadrangle. However, the configuration is a little different. Notice that the center structure is 7 doorways, with the middle one being larger. And then there's 2 on the right and 2 on the left. I'm sure that there's a teaching in that, but we don't have the benefit of the murals that were painted on the walls inside of those rooms to tell us what the specific teaching would be. Now, connected to the same platform and just a little south of the Governor's Palace is the huge south tipple with 9 stair-step levels. This represents the celestial level of heaven. And here it is. The 9 stair steps are going up here, taking you to the top. I didn't count them. Terry Scott, are you here? Terry may have counted them. We went up them. And we're spent by the time we got to the top. This pyramid representing the celestial level of heaven seems to be validated by the fact that it is at the same elevation as the pyramid that represents the moment of creation. In other words, the height of this pyramid is the same as the height of the big one when we came in on the east end of the plaza up there. This, just to give you an idea, is an artist's rendition of the 2 structures we just talked about, the terrestrial glories and the celestial glories. Notice terrestrial has 4 levels, the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 elements of creation, and so on. It all substantiates that this is a terrestrial level. So, we were introduced to creation, the Garden of Eden, the gospel to reconnect man after his fall, the battle that takes place in the spiritual realm as we prepare to be welcomed into the afterlife. The interesting part is, while we're engaged here in this realm, the spiritual battles, how many times in the Book of Mormon does it say, you must endure to the end? As tough as it gets, must endure to the end, and then there's the hope of the glories. So, The interesting part is when we were there last summer, they had started to uncover more of this area. They're developing this. This whole area was off limits. So there's another entire side of this, and it'd be interesting to see what would be found in those structures, what is embedded in the architecture that they've reconstructed there. But that is the gospel message at Uxmal.